What's up, Craig? We got a couple of people already on the YouTube. Awesome. Greg, Bradley, what's up? We're going to try to keep outsiders from getting in this time. I apologize. You have to look at my hand because my video camera on this thing is so, which I love my computer, but the webcam is like so awkwardly placed, which is why you have this very weird view of me. Chris, do you know if we had any questions that are already posted? I don't
I don't
believe it.
believe we've had any that have percolated quite yet.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I'll let you talk a little bit while I'm posting these links, Chris.
Yeah.
I know we talked about this for those who maybe didn't listen to the podcast this week. We did talk about this a little bit, but the virtual, the virtual learning now that South Carolina is able to do as far as football, obviously still not ideal, but Chris, at least makes sense, I think, from a just common sense standpoint, and the fact that you do have the technology now to do that, very similar to what we're doing right now. But what do you think of the SEC and then most of the conference's decision to allow that? And how do you believe that maybe helps out South Carolina and everybody else in the SEC? Just at least having some ability, to be able to chat with their players and be around them, and not be around them obviously in person, but to be able to have those virtual meetings.
Yeah, I mean, they always talk in terms of, mental reps, physical reps. So obviously the players' physical reps with the coaching staff are non-existent. I mean, they're not only, even when you're not having spring practice, you think of the weight room, in the off season, and that's a situation where Paul Jackson and his staff can, be supervising those guys. And it's little things, technique is something that Paul Jackson's harped on. And obviously when you're in a football practice situation, you got coaches right there explaining, this is the way we want it done from a technique standpoint. They can actually show them, they can put hands on players to show them what to do, correct things, and make those corrections live while it's being done. So it's a huge disadvantage, but everybody in the SEC is on that same playing field. Is a huge disadvantage to the players and the coaches to not be able to have that, just in terms of their overall development. But this helps some, just being able to meet for the camaraderie, for, you think of Mike Bobo installing this offense. That's something that's obviously significant when you're trying to install an offense, when you're trying to bring along some younger players at certain spots defensively, then it becomes a challenge. So I think this could help some. And there's a huge onus even more on the players now, even with this decision, because the players, it's on them to work out, to be able to, can you find equipment, places to work out, things to do. The staff can give them guidance, but it's obviously, really difficult for them. And they got to be disciplined and getting in their own playbook and things like that. I think the staff can meet with the players for 2 hours a week, I think. We don't know yet, or I don't, at least Wes, I won't speak for you. I don't know any of the logistics about how they're doing that. But it's a positive for them. But overall, it's something that's still, it's challenging times for these guys that are trying to develop.
Yeah, Chris, I thought it was interesting. I saw the football Gamecock football account tweet today, and let's see. One of our first questions here is from Tommy, who's a Gamecock Central subscriber. Let's see, he's got a couple of questions. He said, "Are they going to be able to use VR, like virtual reality, to help with learning?" That's something we've seen teams start to implement, I believe, in-house, like in their football operations facilities. I don't believe South Carolina has used that to this point, but pulling up Twitter again now, South Carolina has partnered with this company, Learn to Win, out in California, which according to their Twitter, It is an interactive learning app that aims to break down complex material into bite-sized pieces for quicker and deeper learning. That's something I think that you're probably going to see South Carolina and schools around the country have to do more of, as far as taking advantage of this technology we do have. Um, this apparently allows them to look at the materials and the playbooks from a sort of different perspective. And I don't know how much of that, if any of it, actually involves any virtual reality type learning, but it seems like South Carolina, and I'm sure, programs everywhere are looking now to see what's out there, what is available as far as a resource, um, to take this to the next level, to where it's past the point of just hopping on and talking with your quarterback room, and actually being able to use this to learn. Chris, we were talking on the podcast. One of the most important things about meeting during spring practice is that you're correcting. You're having, a lot of times, the way these practices are structured, they never have practice anymore on back-to-back days. Most of the time, it's a practice on one day, a day off, and then a practice the next day, when they had spring practice. And the reason for that is your day off is really, it's a weightlifting time, but it's a meeting time, and you're going over film. If you're a coach, you have your group in there. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? We've got to correct this. We've got to take what we're doing physically and then adjust mentally to where you don't make that same mistake again. So, yeah, I think obviously you get more from having the meetings than you would if you were just sitting at home, or if you were having to call your coach individually. But you're just missing that sort of muscle memory part of going out there and physically doing it, then correcting it in the meeting, and then going out the next day and trying to correct it, physically. And I think just a big hurdle for guys right now is that they really can't even get together on their own. Generally, even if it's not, a NCAA, if it's not a time when you can get together as a team officially, generally, Ryan Helinski, Luke Doty, Jay Urich, whoever can grab a handful of guys and say, hey, let's go get some work in. Right now, they're all dispersed, most of them back at home. Gyms, a lot of places are now, when we talked last week, there were still some gyms that were open. Now, at least if you're in the state of South Carolina and many other states, there are no gyms that are open. So I think it really makes it tough on these guys right now to find a way to stay sharp physically. At least maybe some of this stuff with the meetings helps them stay a little bit more sharp mentally than they would have otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said earlier, gigantic challenge for these guys. And, South Carolina's not alone in it. I mean, there's different things sort of across the country, and across conferences, but everybody in conference that South Carolina plays in right now is on the same, playing field in terms of that. And really, around the Southeast, it looks like. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think for me, we've had a lot of questions on just, um, how is this going to affect the team's development? And right now, obviously, they're in a stall with that. But how much will it affect them in the future? I think time will tell, because when are the coaches going to be able to get their hands back on the players, physically in the meeting room, face to face on the field? Greg Sankey, just listening to him speak and see what he's had to say during this process, has made it pretty evident that he wants to give these guys an opportunity to prepare for the season at some point, but nobody knows when that's going to be. Are we going to have spring practice in May or June? Well, maybe, but maybe not. I mean, we don't know what that's going to look like. Are they going to have to structure spring practice and quote unquote fall practice back to back? Maybe, but we don't know. Then you got all sorts of considerations with player health and giving them time off, and all these different rules about how many hours and at what time of the year they can participate in it. So they're going to have to make some changes, some concessions. And I think maybe we'll have a better idea, maybe say in 2 weeks, a month, as to where it could go. But right now, everybody's just sort of running scenarios, best case, worst case, and see where it goes from there. Do we want to hit the second part of that question, or actually the first part about Kyle Krantz and special teams from Tommy?
Yeah, I think we got some stuff we can say on that. And I will say, um, if anything, for me personally, um, this entire thing has made me at least attempt to be a little more aware about what's going on in the country and paying attention. I mean, I don't know about you, man. I didn't watch really the news itself very often, but at least as far as like national news and politics and all this stuff, this is the most tuned in I've ever been, probably in my adult life, to what's going on outside of the sports world. And so I have paid attention to a lot of the reporting and the daily updates from the White House and all that stuff. And it seems like, because I know everybody wants to talk about what does all this mean for football, and is there even going to be a season? And we keep giving that answer. Who knows? We'll find out. It seems like these next couple of weeks are going to be huge. A lot of the projections I've seen, at least nationally, have like the middle of April being the highest projected total deaths in a day, at least somewhere around April 15th. And then a lot of the stuff I've seen at that point, you're sort of hopefully at the top of the curve, and it starts to come down. And I've seen, end of April, and then I've seen like end of May being the point where it starts to, and these projections, who knows, you're dealing with incomplete data, but still, at least with this as a guide, it seems like the next 2 weeks are huge, and then that the next 2 months are going to be massive as far as finding out, can this thing die out, and then we can maybe start getting back to normal, or at that point, when you get it completely slowed down, even by the projections, are we dealing with it popping back up? And we try to get back to normal, and then we have sort of a relapse where the numbers start going up again. And I think that's the big thing. If it goes through the curve, and then we get into the beginning of summer and the numbers are very low, then you have a good 3 months to start to think about how we can re-implement our sports before football gets here. And even if you have to push football back a month, Chris, so be it. I think everybody, not to make it about finances, but when you're looking at an athletic department, the amount of money that comes in based on that football season and what it does to support your entire athletic department throughout the country, to me, that they're going to try to find a way to get these games in, even if it's a weird schedule, even if it's a shortened schedule, even if it's pushed back. They're going to do everything they can to find a way, just because your football program supports so many other aspects of what you're trying to do. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm with you, man. I think the next couple of weeks we start to have a better idea, and then I think certainly by May, we hopefully start to have an even better idea of where this is headed, both from a just medical quality of life, everything else standpoint, which then trickles down, I think, to sports. Because man, people need, at some point, people need their sports, they need their hobbies, they need their sort of getaways from regular life. And I think a lot of people are missing that right now. So it is, on top of the virus itself, people not being able to sort of partake in their normal activities that they do for fun, is tough right now. So let's hit, let's see, Tommy's other question: is Kyle Krantz ready to head the special teams as the guy this year? Chris, I will start by saying, if you talk to people who are either in that football facility or are around it, the first thing they say if you bring up Kyle Krantz is that he's one of the sharpest dudes in the room. Like, he is a very sharp guy. Players really, really like him. A lot of the DBs sort of, I think, credit him with putting in extra work with them and side work, and even doing note card work where he's doing, going old school. And bringing in note cards just to try to help guys learn off the field. And then something I'll let you speak to, Chris. I believe bringing in a guy like Rod Wilson with his experience at the NFL level, with his ability to connect to players as well, connect to kids. I think if you just sort of had Kyle Krantz sort of taking over that spot, that's a big jump, man, for anybody. I think he's capable, but would there be at least a learning period? Maybe. I think that's at least worth questioning. Is that something that could happen? Yes, but I think having both those guys sort of working together, bringing in Rod Wilson, bringing in just some new ideas. I think that helps. And one thing I know you picked up, Chris, was that there was a lot of talk that Rod was probably close to getting his first chance to run special teams at the NFL level. So I don't want to make this completely about him and not about Kyle Krantz, because I think he can handle it. But I think it's more about the ability of both of those guys to handle special teams.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, typically when you see special teams, I mean, a lot of times other coaches are going to be involved. I mean, you watch practice run, for instance, and there are all these different components and moving parts to special teams, just like there is on defense, just like there is on offense. When you think of special teams and the coordinator, it's very similar to an offensive coordinator is overseeing all the different positional units, and then all those come together and you call a play and you run it. Same thing with defense, same thing with special teams. And so, it's when you watch practice, you're going to see, Bobby Bentley working with a group. You're going to see, T-Rob and Brian McClendon working with the returners. With Krantz, I mean, you're exactly right about his football mind and all those things. He's extremely smart, but he is going into his first year of coordinating, special teams. And, you lose a, really good punter in Joseph Charlton. You lose Brian Edwards. And so there are some, things that could fairly and accurately be called questions going into the season. And Krantz is going to bring some different ideas to the table, certainly from a mind and a football coaching standpoint. He's more than capable of it. But having Rod Wilson, who, is a really bright guy as well, who oversaw a Super Bowl winning team, helped with, he was a special teams assistant. He didn't run the group there, but he was involved with it. They were quite good in that area. And you're exactly right. A lot of the feedback, from the league that we picked up was that he was going to have an opportunity soon to be an NFL coordinator, to get to run his own room. And so he's always, I think it's fortunate for South Carolina that he's wanted to get back to Columbia to be a coach. Obviously he has experience at the college level at Charleston Southern. He's got special teams coaching, and coordinating, sort of co-coordinating experience, and he's got linebacker coaching experience at Charleston Southern, so he's going to blend both those things. And so I think he'll help make them better as well, and Krantz may bring some new ideas to the table. I think you just lose some stability. Coleman Hutzler, who departed for Texas in the offseason, he was a guy that was experienced. He and Muschamp worked very closely together. He knew, their philosophies matched as far as what they wanted to do. And he did a good job with it. And so, just losing that experience and then losing Charlton and Edwards, like I said, and bringing in somebody new, it just creates some questions. But I think that with the arrangement that they have now, that inside the building, they feel pretty good about it, but they'll still have to answer some questions. They got questions in a lot of places though. So I think that's how they're going into it this season.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of questions that are going to be impossible to answer, we have a question on YouTube from Bradley. Record this football season, Chris. That is, I believe, nearly impossible to answer just because of all the things we've talked about. But hey, I'll put you on the spot, man. What do you think?
Well, since we got time here on Zoom, instead of me just pulling out a number, let me just sort of look at the schedule. And for these purposes, we don't really care about when the season begins, but what we do care about is that they play the entire season.
That there is a season at some point.
We need to have a season, and we need to have the schedule be the same as it is now. But I could, if it's all right with us, I'll just maybe go through and sort of handicap.
Yeah, go
I'd
for
say
it.
maybe the games that I would like favor South Carolina in, maybe toss up, maybe that might be a good way to do it. So one thing that I do think, going into this season is that South Carolina has a chance to start out 4-0. Chance is what I said. Did not say they will. I'll try to be a little bit more specific, but you would figure against Coastal and ECU, East Carolina, the first two games at home, you'd probably favor South Carolina. Missouri is a home game. Kentucky being an away game, I think they're still going to have some very good pieces. I think that's going to be a difficult game, as it has been the past several years for South Carolina. Those honestly may be a little bit more toss-up category. If we take it sort of in thirds, Wes, what do you think? I mean, do you see a more likely 4-0? Do you see a game dropped somewhere in there in that Missouri Kentucky range to make them 3-1? Do you see 2-2?
What are the first four? I mean, they open with
You
Coastal,
got
right?
Coastal and East Carolina at home, and then
Mhm.
Missouri at home, and then Kentucky on the road in Lexington, which is always going to be a tough game. And the Missouri game at home, I don't think will be. Eli Drinkwitz's squad at App State just came in here last year, and and did a good job and came away with a win during a poor season for South Carolina. But I think I just can't put either of those games as automatic wins right now. The first two, I don't want to put them on autopilot, but I think the first two are wins. Second two winnable, but not, definitely not a sure thing for me.
Yeah, I when you look at it like that, and I think we'll sort of look at it, Chris, as even if we put it in a definite win category, we know there's no such thing as a definite win. But for the purpose of what we're talking about, we'll say win the first two, so 2-0. South Carolina will be heavily favored to win those two games. And I think you look at it, and if they're going to have the year that they need to have and want to have, then they probably need to win the next two as well. Now, I think if we're sort of just handicapping it, just to sort of play the season out, let's say they win the first two, and without really even knowing or predicting which one out of the next two, let's just say they split the next two. Win one close, lose the other close, and now you're sitting at 3-1. And I don't have a feel, and you maybe do, Chris. We got all the time in the world, so maybe this is something to look into. But what do you know what it looks like for Missouri and Kentucky as far as their teams compared to last year? What they've lost, what they have coming back. Obviously, we know Missouri is going to have a different quarterback at the helm, different head coach at the helm. And I got to wonder if it's hard enough to install a new offense or a new defense. If you're a new coach, I mean, man, I think playing Missouri early, and that game's at home, that's probably very much in South Carolina's favor.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, question at quarterback, they're going to, they have lost some guys. So they lose, I think they're losing 3 offensive linemen. Yasir Durant was a good player for them, Tristan Castillo. They're losing a couple guys who are good players at receiver with Jonathan Nance, Jonathan Johnson, Kelly Bryan, obviously. Alberto's gone, right? And then, defensively, DeMarcus Acey, who's played there since roughly the year 2000, is
he's on the Mike Kotsar plan.
Yeah, he's been around a while. Jordan Elliott, who was a really good player inside, There, there have been a lot of transfer rumors for Missouri that have not happened. And so I'll be curious to see if those happen. There's a couple key guys defensively that they really need to keep. They got some good players there. I mean, I think Kobe Whiteside and Nick Bolton at linebacker is a really good player. So they've got some questions, and I think they'll do a good job of maximizing. That's a game that South Carolina can win for sure. Honestly, man, I think Kentucky is probably the more difficult game because it's away. For some reason, Kentucky has matched up quite well with South Carolina. And I think they've got a little bit more coming back. They lose Lynn Bowden, who is really good. But they get back a good many players. They've had a pretty good offensive line, even though South Carolina dominated that matchup last year. From an offensive line standpoint, they've done a pretty good job. Mark Stoops he's really done an underrated job of recruiting, in terms of what they got coming back defensively, up front at linebacker in the secondary. They got a chance to be pretty salty. So if I'm going to pick a game for them to drop in that first four, I would pick the Kentucky game. I'm not saying they will lose it, but that to me would be the biggest, question mark of them. And then, I'm already going to get ahead of myself, but just to complete the thought, going through the rest, you look at Florida, right, on the road. If you have to pick that game, knowing that we haven't even gone through spring ball here, sitting in April, haven't gone through spring ball for either.
Is that next? Is Florida next?
It's Kentucky away, Florida away, direct with back to back. That's tough. And so I think you look at it, all things considered, if you're having to handicap that game, I'd probably put it in the loss column if you make me pick, right? If I can't hedge and say toss up, then you got Tennessee at home.
So did you give them the win against Kentucky, or did we split those?
I gave them 3-1 in that first four. I said that was more likely. I sort of a little bit of a coward route there and didn't pick for sure. But I think honestly, man, if you look at it in the first five, I can see 2 losses. All right, then you get Tennessee at home. Another, Tennessee's losing some pieces. They bring back some intriguing pieces. More of a toss-up. Then you're open. A&M at home. Can you finally beat those guys? Win a bowl game, I think. Vandy away, a game you should, at this point, always win. Georgia at home. That'll be a dogfight. LSU away. Wofford at home. Clemson away. So, when I look at this schedule, if you got Chris, pick the losses, pick the ones that you feel like if you had to pick without seeing spring ball, without this team's going through summer or preseason practice, no freshmen on campus, no JUCO transfers on campus except for your early enrollees, whatever it may be, the games that you feel like South Carolina is most likely to drop, I'd pick Florida away, Georgia at home, LSU and Clemson away. But there are several toss-ups. And look, I mean, this South Carolina team that wasn't good last year from a record standpoint went into Athens and beat Georgia last year. So, I think you never know. But if the flip side of it is you go through, and we did this last year on a very challenging 2019 schedule. You go through and you say, pick the wins. Pick the games you feel like, all right, I feel like South Carolina will win this game. I've got about 4, I got Coastal, East Carolina, Vandy, and Wofford. Beyond that, everything's just about a toss-up or, a very difficult situation to win for me. I don't know if you're sort of on the same line of thinking there or not.
Yeah, well, man, I think when you look at the SEC in general, it's kind of, for me, you have a couple maybe bottom teams every year. You maybe have 2 or 3 elite teams where you look at them and say, man, if you play them, you better hope you have your A game and you better hope they have an off game.
Right.
and then you have all these teams just stuck in the middle. And, whether you play well that day, um, whether your injuries are, whether you haven't had injuries or you've had a bunch of injuries, and whether that opponent has, um, whether, you know, the opponent's quarterback's girlfriend broke up with it. You know what I mean? It's like the margin is so small, but between those different schools, it's kind of one of those things where on any get like to throw the cliche out there, but especially for, I mean, what would you say the middle? If you're saying maybe two great teams on one side of it, two really bad teams on the other side of it, um, those middle 10 teams when they play each other, really anything can happen.
Yep.
And I think you see that play out. And for South Carolina, I think, one thing I was talking about this with a high school coach last week. One thing I think maybe having Mike Bobo as the offensive coordinator and maybe going a little bit more to some more traditional type stuff is that you maybe don't quite have as much variance between offensive performances. Now, are you going to have an offense that is likely to just throw something crazy out there and completely light up a defense that maybe they shouldn't on paper? Probably not. But I think having a veteran guy who knows what his scheme is, knows what he wants to do, knows all of the counters for everything a defense can do to you, someone who has all those answers, I believe that also puts you in a better place to where you feel a little bit more comfortable that you're going to perform against the teams you're supposed to. And I think South Carolina's issues last year was just, especially late in the year, you were getting nothing from the offense. And, we saw that same, especially you go back 2 seasons ago, we saw that same offense put up huge numbers, at Clemson. Then you see them in the first half and early third quarter against Florida, go up and down the field making big plays. And you see South Carolina get a big jump on Akron in the final game of that season, and then not score in the second half at all, and then not score in the bowl game at all. So I think, and at least wonder out loud, will we see this team offensively at least, will there be a little bit less variance from the highs of the highs and the lows of the lows offensively, to where with a veteran play caller and a little bit more of sort of a veteran scheme, as opposed to a scheme where they're pulling from here, pulling from there, trying to sort of build it, like stitch it together almost. You saw some great game plans. The Clemson game plan was outstanding.
Yep.
But then I think just you feel a little bit more comfortable going into each game. And if the defense can be as good as I think they can, and if the defense can avoid the injury bug, which has obviously been a big part of why things have gone wrong at times, then I think you feel a little bit better about South Carolina at least being in the games where the talent's fairly equal, and maybe winning the games that they're supposed to. I don't know that it's going to play out like that, but just having a discussion with a high school coach who follows all this stuff very closely, that I talk to a lot, that was one of his ideas about having a veteran OC, is that maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable about the consistency of the offense from game to game.
Yeah, and I mean Bobo, he's done a lot of different things, right? I mean, we could feel pretty comfortable that there are certain things that he's, South Carolina's going to utilize a fullback look more. How much, we don't know. The coaches are still trying to figure that out. If we had Mike Bobo in on this Zoom, and feel free to join if he won't, I'm sure he's listening. Then we could literally ask him, Coach, how much eye are you going to run this year? And he may have an inkling based on what he's seen on film and in spring practice, but they were still in the middle of installing, figuring out what can their players do. So, he probably isn't completely sure, and they got to continue working through, what they've got on the roster to build that out. But he's got a pretty multiple offense. We discussed that a lot. He runs some I, will run 4 wide, will utilize an H back. They'll go out of the gun, then they'll be in the I. They do some different things, and he's obviously seen a lot. He's coordinated an offense since 2007. 27 to 2014 at Georgia, and then his time at Colorado State, he ran the offense basically the entire time. And he's had some explosive performances in those times. He's had some good offenses. And so I think, just that consistency, like you said, South Carolina doesn't need to, they're not going to be next season. I'm sure they hope to get to that point. They don't need to go out and be a team that you feel like, man, South Carolina could come out here on any Saturday and score 45 points. They don't need to be that. But what they do need to be is consistent, and they need to be good. Not great, not elite, because they're not going to be that. But they need to be able to go out there and be good offensively. They need to not put the defense in such bad situations with a bunch of 3 and outs, poor field position, turnovers. And they need to be able to create some explosive plays, put some points on the board, and not, go back and forth between some of the performances we saw in certain games to, like you said, sort of that goose egg, mentality. That's what they really have to avoid. And, if they do that, they'll have a chance for some success.
All right, we're going to keep going through the schedule, but I do want to hit a couple of these questions on YouTube chat real quick here. Gamecock fan 753. And by the way, thanks to all of you who are tuning in and chiming in. Hopefully, we're at least giving you something to do on this quarantine day. Gamecock fan 753. Do you think we will ever win a national championship in football? I will say things may not look great right now for that, but I mean, Chris, there are a few things going in 2012 or 2013 to being right up there in that conversation. Especially if you had the 14 playoff at the time. So does it look right now like that answer would be yes? Obviously not, but man, I mean, it can turn so fast. And if you have a good run of talent in this state and you land a bunch of those guys and then you get a few breaks, I mean, who's to say South Carolina can't? I mean, Clemson has been towards the top of that mountain or at the top of that mountain for the last 4 or 5 years now. But if you'd have told me in 2012 or 2013 that Clemson was going to win a couple of national titles, play for a couple more, and be in the playoff every year, dude, I'd have told you were insane. I mean, Steve Spurrier almost got Dabo Swinney run out of town just by losing to South Carolina, so who's to say that South Carolina can't win a national title? I know that sounds crazy right now, but who knows, man? I would never say no to that. If you're not sort of thinking that big or pushing for that, then why are you even watching your team? I think if you compete for the East, and that's ultimately the goal. If you compete for the East, then the year that you win the East, you're always going to be in that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the first goal, right? You got to get to where you can, you don't even have to win. History shows us you don't even have to win your rivalry game to go win the conference. Nobody wants to hear that, but Clemson was winning the ACC in the midst of that losing streak to South Carolina that was so miserable for everybody. They were getting there. You look at Alabama and Auburn, winning that rivalry game does not necessarily, obviously helps. I mean, that's an in-conference game, but, it's not everything. You want to, the goals that South Carolina outlines as far as beat the East, win the state, those are the things that you want to go do. Because if you can do those, you're going to be in a really good position, but you're right. I mean, look, does it look right now like South Carolina has turned that corner that maybe you started to see some inklings of, like in 2009, 2010 certainly was a big turnaround because they actually did go win the East And then things started building and you could sort of feel it. For instance, they go have the 2010 season, they win the East. Then they go sign Jadeveon Clowney. So then you're like, okay, this is looking pretty good. Marcus Lattimore's still on our roster. Got Jadeveon Clowney, Alshon Jeffrey's on the roster. And things continue building there, and they just missed that window. Now, maybe that's the only window South Carolina will ever have had. We don't know. History will play that out. So, I'm with you, Wes. It's possible. Is it likely where we're sitting right now? No, you couldn't say that with any level of fairness. But it is possible. If you're like making me answer the question, will it ever happen? Right now, based on the body of work, you'd probably say I don't see it, but it is possible because South Carolina has been close before. They really have been pretty close. I know they've only been, SEC East title game one time, but they dropped an inexplicable game twice. Auburn one year, Tennessee another year. The best team ever, 2012, that would have had a chance to win a national title, ran into 2 road games in the SEC at LSU and at Florida, and that eliminated that opportunity for them. But they have been close, and they have shown that it can be done, that they can get to that level. And if you can you got to have a really good team, and then you got to have a little fortune to win a title. I mean, there isn't a team out there that's won a championship that hasn't had some level of fortune, whether it's injuries, an injury to another team, a favorable schedule, whatever it may be. You have to create most of what you need to get there. And so that's where South Carolina has to get right now. They got to create most of what they need. And then they have to, at some point or another, catch a big break or two that could push them over the top if they could get to the level they need to get back to.
Yeah, and I agree. But I will say, I'm gonna say, because this stuff can change so quick. I'm gonna say within 25 years, within at some point in the next 25 years, South Carolina will make the college football playoff.
Whoa!
So I don't know. I don't know when. I don't know how. I don't know which players will be there, who will be running the show. But at some point in the next 25 years, South Carolina will make the college football playoff, because we've seen in cycles South Carolina be able to put together a team that is capable of competing at that level. Has it worked out yet? No, but you got to keep getting to that point, and then eventually, if you keep knocking on that door, you're gonna find a way to kick the door in. Let's see. I got a few more questions. Don Chambers. Let's see. Do you think Colin Hill has a legitimate chance of being the starter come Coastal Week? So that would be week 1, game 1. If the season is postponed, does that increase his chances of starting? I tend to think, Chris, that ultimately Ryan Helinski, personal opinion, will start game 1, but I know that there is a lot of chatter as well that Colin Hill is a guy who did not leave Colorado State and come back to South Carolina just to sit around and coach up Ryan Helinski from the bench. That,
right.
I think when that was announced, there was the thought process, oh, this guy's coming in to be a backup in his final year and wants to play SEC ball, wants to be with Bobo, et cetera, wants to be back close to home. Obviously, he's from, went to Dorman. All those things being true, it did not come to South Carolina to just give the position away. So I believe truly that Colin Hill will push that position and will be in the conversation. Maybe even start a game at some point this year. Me personally, though, I think knowing what Bobo has said about Helinski in the one interview he did give before they shut things down this spring, the progression there, the fact he started so many games last year, I would still give Helinski the edge to start game 1, with that caveat that he will be pushed by Colin Hill, and I believe pushed to an extent by Luke Doty, who has come in and impressed everyone both on and off the field, with his knowledge, his work ethic, and his leadership ability.
Yeah, I think I don't want to say shifted, but I thought that, maybe going into the spring, just based on some things we heard, behind the scenes about Colin Hill and how high Mike Bobo was on him. And obviously there's that comfort level. He knows the offense. He's been in it. He's played well in it. There's a trust level. I started thinking, man, is Colin Hill, does he have a chance to be the guy? And the answer still has a chance. But I think that, him missing the spring and Ryan Helinski really playing well. They only had 4 or 5 practices, Wes?
Five practices.
5 practices.
5.
But through that third of practice they were able to have, multiple people have talked to us about how Ryan Helinski was playing quite well. They were quite happy with him. And so I think that does give him a leg up. For South Carolina, look, that's great. If you've got 2 guys that you feel good about, you want there to be some level of separation. There's that adage about if you got 2, you don't have any. And that might not necessarily be true. You want 2 that you feel really good about. And so they may indeed end up having that. There's still some questions there for me, and got to get into the season. And certainly Helinski's got to be healthy, and he's got to be playing better. And the team has to play better around him too than they were, say, at the end of the year. There's no question about that. Individually and as a team, they got to play better. Maybe there will be some type of change, but I right now where I'm sitting, I still think Helinski has the best shot to open the season as the starter and go from there.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go Brock Lee on YouTube. Again, thank you guys for tuning in and posting some questions. He says, would you rather keep Will Muschamp or trade him out for Les Miles? No disrespect to Muschamp. Chris, I'll let you take that one.
Trade him. We can trade coaches now. It really has gone crazy. No, I don't think Les Miles would be the answer at South Carolina. I don't think. Look, there is no doubt the on-field product is going to have to get better. And it really, the way that 2018 ended, with the bowl game laying an egg into 2019, when it was just a pile of injuries and a pile of inconsistent offensive performances, and ending the season the way that they did, losing to App State at home. Those things, it just put such a bad taste in the mouth of Gamecock fans. They started the season by losing to North Carolina in the same place that they lost to Virginia in that bowl game, in the Belk Bowl, 2 hugely disappointing losses. And then the entire season, save for the Georgia game and like the first half of the Florida game, was a disappointment. So that said, there's still some signs of things you like. Their talent at certain positions has increased. The defensive line's gotten better. They've appeared to recruit well at certain positions. They just, the recruiting sort of ascension, if you look at it, it's maybe a slower build, and maybe some of it hasn't shown up, but getting some bona fide, stud type players like Rick Sandage or Zach Pickens, Marshawn Lloyd, Ryan Helinski, Luke Doty, stacking those guys, maybe that helps you. The problem for South Carolina is Clemson's a great team. Georgia's always loaded. Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, all these teams, Florida, they all appear to maybe be getting better too. And so at some point soon, South Carolina is going to have to turn things around and notch a couple victories and get back in the positive win column for things to continue. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They gotta stabilize, and this season's got to be the one where they can do it. If they can do that and go win, 7, go get to a bowl game, win a bowl game. If they can do that, then I think you feel better about the trajectory. And I think some good things have been done, and not ignoring at all the reality of the situation and how the program needs to improve and go forward.
All right, we're going to hit one more question here before I then tell you, Chris, and everyone else, the most important game of the entire football season for South Carolina next year. Our next question is from one Colin Taylor.
Whoa,
he says, outside of both of you, who's the best journalist on the beat right now? Asking for a friend.
The best journalist on the beat, aside from who? Either of us?
aside from me and you?
I mean, I've got to go Colin Taylor. I mean,
So
I
I was
don't know.
going to go Josh Kendall, but
Is there any relation to Colin Taylor who writes for us? This Colin Taylor who's asking the question? Do you think they're related at all?
uh, they do look similar. Yeah.
Oh, you can see him. Okay.
Yeah, he's got a profile picture.
I
Um,
I could not believe that he would actually ask that question, trying to point it to himself.
yeah, my answer is Josh Kendall. Sorry, Colin. Um, kidding, of course, but okay. So, and I know some people in Gamecock Nation like to hate on Josh, but I do like Josh a lot and think he does a good job, as does Colin. As do a lot of people on this beat. So,
Yes.
it's all in fun. Okay, Chris, the most important game of the football season next year for South Carolina
Here we go.
what's your guess?
Oh, most important game of the season. So I got to think about stuff. Am I over?
Tennessee. It's Tennessee.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking, man. I was going to say, are you going to go with Missouri? Because you feel like, man, if you lose that Missouri game, but you almost feel like if you drop that Missouri game and still beat Tennessee, depending on what else you do. But
Yeah,
I agree with you there. I agree with you for a lot.
I think they're beating Missouri next year because of all the things I talked about. And
hold on, let me keep up with all those. All right, Carolina's beating Missouri and wins a natty in the next 25 years. All right, good. I'm writing off. I can keep up.
Yeah, 23 years from now, I hope you still have that piece of paper. But no, I mean that game is what, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the 6th game of the year. So it's right smack dab in the middle of the season. By our just little quick rundown, you went 3-1 by splitting Missouri and Kentucky, and then lost to Florida. So you're 3-2 with Tennessee coming into your house. They're the SEC East team that I believe for the last decade has been that close to South Carolina, whereas you're almost always maybe a step or two ahead or a step or two behind Tennessee, depending on the particular season. The team that I believe it's most realistic for South Carolina to consistently pass in the East, as far as what you traditionally think of the SEC East powers. And as far as our rundown in this schedule, they're the difference between being 4-2 with Texas A&M coming to your house after a bye week, and being 3-3, staring Texas A&M in the face, a team that you haven't ever beaten. So, if you're South Carolina and you're sitting at 4-2 with an extra week to get ready for Texas A&M to come into your house, and listen, after A&M, you got Vanderbilt, which, like you said earlier, you always, at least on paper, you always count Vanderbilt as a W. So really, to me, for the first 8 games of the year, the Tennessee game is the swing game. That is the difference between chasing bowl eligibility, which is what South Carolina had to do this past season, versus being ahead of the pace and being in a position to go ahead and get that part of the conversation out of the way. I feel like if you're South Carolina, getting that part out of the way early on and keeping some of the pressure. This team was under so much pressure to perform last year because of the way the season started. The fact that they were in a hole from the very, very beginning in chasing bowl eligibility, I think all year long. To just get a little bit ahead of the pace and to not have so much pressure. I remember the Kentucky game, which they did perform well in. Going into that game, there was so much pressure on this team, both internally and from the outside. And I think you look at how a season plays out, and we can play it out on paper. We can look at the individual matchups all we want, but the way a team, the way a season actually flows, as far as building some momentum and feeling good about yourselves and not having so much pressure, when I look at this schedule, the game that determines that, and it's an important game for South Carolina in recruiting as well. We know how often they, they match up head to head. To me, it's got to be South Carolina versus Tennessee on October 10th.
You're dead on. I mean, they're just, you hit all the reasons, in terms of where it falls in the schedule and where South Carolina can get from a record standpoint. You got to have that, even it sounds a little silly, but you got to have that perception, whether it's among fans, among recruits, that look, Tennessee hadn't passed South Carolina, right? I mean, that's the perception that you need to create. And then it goes back to recruiting. You're right. They're going to butt heads a lot. That's going to be the case with a lot of these teams that South Carolina faces off against, Georgia. There's a few teams that Clemson is not going to cross paths as much at this point with South Carolina on the recruiting trail. There's going to be some guys. They don't cross paths a ton, especially in state right now. Kentucky, they do a lot of, there's some, because they recruit in Georgia, Florida, but they're going to have Kentucky kids. They're going to hit Ohio hard. They're going to go to Michigan. So when you look at Tennessee, that's one where it's a battleground, and Georgia, that's another one where there's a battleground. So I think there's sort of always an added component to those games. And so I'm with you. That's the one I'd have to pick as well.
My internet is going in and out, guys, so apologize for that. I guess we should probably wrap it up. Hopefully y'all can still hear me. I know my internet was going in and out. Chris, am I back on? Can you hear me?
You're on. Yep.
Okay. All right, cool. It was freezing up on me. Got one more question on here. BRT says, is football canceled? To that, I will say, God, I hope not. As of right now, no.
Right.
I'll say the same thing we've said. It's way too early, I think, to have that discussion, to know at all. My answer to that, though, would be, Chris, if there's anything, we talked about this at the start, if there's anything they can do to have football, then they'll have football.
Yes. For many, many reasons.
Yeah, I don't care if it's I don't care if it's a 10-game season. I don't care if it's an 8-game season. I don't care if it's pushed back. I don't care if we're having football at Christmas. One way or another. I mean, the NFL season goes until the Super Bowl is like the first weekend of February. So if it has to take place, now I know obviously you have some situations there with school and the semester ending and stuff like that, but as the NCAA has shown with the spring sports stuff, you can always change the rules to accommodate what needs to happen.
Yes.
For for sports, and the NCAA, to give them credit, made the right decision. And knowing it was going to be messy, they still gave spring sport players an added year of eligibility because they all lost their seasons this past year. So give them credit. And, and I thought, when I first thought about this, I was like, well, baseball players don't stay until they're seniors anyway. And I was like, this maybe isn't a huge deal. And then I really started thinking about it, and I was like, well, what about the juniors for baseball that usually leave after their junior season and didn't get to play really as juniors, and then would have lost all of their leverage? I think it actually affects the juniors as far as baseball at a place like South Carolina more so than it does the seniors, just because those guys, when you were counting up your numbers, as far as your scholarships and who you're bringing in as freshmen, those juniors, a lot of them you weren't counting on. You were saying those guys are going to be going to the MLB draft. Now, there's changes to the MLB draft, and your whole roster is going to look completely different. So despite all the messiness of that, the NCAA did the right thing and got that done, and relatively quickly too, to give them a little bit of credit. So having said that, to tie it all back in, Chris, I believe, right now, South Carolina is scheduled to kick off their season on September 5th, which means, generally doesn't South Carolina start their preseason practice, their camp, almost exactly 1 month before?
Yeah. Yeah. It's typically about that time.
So let's say South Carolina right now is scheduled to report August 4th, um, and get in an entire month. Well, depending on what happens with the virus, I mean, I could see a scenario where just the entire season, because right now the season ends on November 28th, at Clemson for South Carolina. I mean, I could see a scenario where if everything has slowed as far as the virus goes, but they're just not quite comfortable yet, putting all these people, 80,000 people in a stadium. Um,
Yeah.
I could see a scenario where you just push the whole thing back a few weeks.
Yeah.
I could see a scenario where you start the season with no fans in the stands. I know that would hurt you financially if you're, the universities, no doubt. But not having that TV money, for an entire football season, would hurt you just as bad. So just to get some type of, cash flow back, some type of revenue back. Because I mean, dude, if college football, when it does return, the need for being able to watch football and the desire to watch football, I believe, is going to be at an all-time high. So, after not having it, so, to answer the question about will we play football without being able to answer the question of will we play football, I would say if there is any scenario whatsoever where we can have football, then they will explore it and they will find a way, even if that means we're playing football until December or until January, like the NFL does. I think college football will do everything in their power to find a way to make it happen.
Yeah. And obviously, I mean, so the first priority, I mean, people I think are thinking about the worst case scenario. And honestly, the worst case scenario is obviously no football at all until sometime next year. That would be worst case. But I think people are trying to think about what's the minimum we could do and still play football. And so that would be what you described as having games with no fans in the stands, because at least then that's going to give. There's two different components to it. The big schools are going to get TV money, and then the little schools, the schools that are getting these big guarantees to go play games, they get $900,000, $1 million to go play Power Five schools. Think about, a school like South Carolina, or pick a Power Five school. If we don't have football, they're going to lose out on tickets. They're going to lose out on concessions. They're going to lose out on TV money. Those three things can be crippling even to places that are in really good shape. South Carolina's in good shape financially as an athletic department. And there are some schools that are not as in good a shape that you would not think. They're operating, in the red. And so then you think, okay, well, there's no football. Well, how can you support other sports? So then you have to think about, are you going to have to cut sports? Then Title IX comes into play. All right, so it's just this domino effect. If you can get the TV money, then you're at least on track to salvage it. Then you think about the smaller schools. The small schools, if they lose out on, whatever their TV stuff may be, and they lose out on tickets and gates, that really, really hurts. But what really hurts them, probably even worse, is losing out on the $900,000 check that they get to go play whatever school. And if there's no football at all, they can't get that. So I think there's just a lot of things at play. And that's why I think they're going to push every possible scenario that they possibly can to try to get games televised and played, and then figure out the fan thing later.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of this is going to depend on what's going on, in the science world, and how this thing is under control, and are are they able to come up with some type of better way to actually to medicate people and stuff like that? I don't. Everything I've read, I mean, we're not going to have a vaccine by football season. I think that's unrealistic just from without being remotely in that field. Everything I've read says, a vaccine is still a good ways away. Even if they develop it and feel great about it, even if tomorrow they said, hey, we feel amazing about this, to actually be able to put a vaccine in hundreds of thousands of people, the standard there, as far as how safe it is a very high standard because you're vaccinating people that are currently healthy. So you can't give hundreds of thousands of people a vaccine that are healthy and have it them then make them sick. So I think a vaccine, as far as football goes, is completely out of the question. Hopefully by next year, that's part of the conversation. Now, maybe some of these drugs that they're testing as far as being able to treat it and put us in a better position worldwide to treat people that have it, to where there's not quite as much of a stigma to getting it. It's not as bad to get it. If they get to that point where they can treat it better, then maybe with the other stuff that's been put in place, maybe that puts us in a little bit better situation to put all these people back. The other thing is, are people going to be comfortable piling into a stadium that close together? Because there ain't any 6 feet apart in Williams-Brice Stadium.
You're right about that.
There ain't 6 inches apart in Neyland Stadium. So,
right.
I mean, there's so many questions. I don't know. We're just sitting at home talking about it, so who knows? But yeah, we'll see. Hopefully, for everybody's sake, we have some football, man. All right, we've gone over an hour here. We're going to try to keep doing these. We're going to run out of stuff to talk about, but we'll just keep hopping on here and talking ball anyway, as long as people listen, as long as people tune in. I'm thinking, Chris, we may be able to do some just like watch parties or something if I can get it to work. I don't know what the legal ramifications are on that either, but I know the Alabama game for 2010 is on YouTube, and it hasn't been deleted in like 10 years. So
copyright court's probably closed, so we're good.
Yeah, I mean, are you really going after football fans? Sitting at home talking about a game from 10 years ago. So maybe we can do that. I've got my quarantine conversations coming up. I'm still working on getting Debo Samuel on. I actually have locked in now for this week, Chris, Mo Brown, who is actually running for office. So, so that'd be cool. I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit, obviously, but more about what else he's been doing, why he wanted to run for office, what he thinks looking back on his career and stuff like that. So, all right, man, you got anything else, Chris?
I think I'm good. Enjoyed it.
Okay, awesome. Want to thank everybody who listened. Hopefully we scratched a little bit of that football itch. And if you're a subscriber, we appreciate you sticking with us despite no football games going on, no sports going on right now. If you're not a subscriber, we do have a special going on, 50% off. Put in the code Gamecocks and you get 50% off your first year of service. For Chris Clark, I'm Wes Mitchell. We'll talk to you during our next Zoom Gamecock Central Q&A next week. Thanks.